In 2010, Brazilian goalkeeper Bruno Fernandes de Souza was on the brink of national stardom. As captain of Flamengo, one of Brazil's biggest clubs, he was regarded as one of the top goalkeepers in the country and was even being considered for Brazil's 2014 World Cup squad. But beneath his promising career was a story so dark, it remains one of the most disturbing sagas in football history. Bruno's downfall began with an affair that led to the birth of a son. The woman involved was Elisa Samudio, a model who had previously accused Bruno of abuse and threatened to take him to court for child support. Bruno denied paternity and reportedly did everything he could to avoid the financial and legal consequences. But what happened next went far beyond scandal or controversy. It became murder. In June 2010, Elisa disappeared. Witnesses claimed she had gone to meet Bruno in order to resolve their dispute. Days turned into weeks, and suspicion began to build. Eventually, Bruno was arrested, and the details that emerged shocked Brazil. Investigators found that Bruno had orchestrated a plan to have Elisa kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. His cousin and former bodyguard testified in court that Elisa had been taken to a remote property owned by Bruno, where she was beaten, strangled, and dismembered. Incredibly, it was reported that her remains were fed to dogs to destroy evidence. Her body was never recovered. Bruno eventually confessed partial involvement, admitting to knowledge of the crime but denying direct participation. However, overwhelming evidence, including testimonies from accomplices, led to his conviction. In 2013, he was sentenced to 22 years and 3 months in prison for aggravated murder, kidnapping, and hiding the body. Yet, the story didn't end there. In 2017, Bruno was released on appeal after serving just over 6 years, citing excessive delays in legal proceedings. Astonishingly, he returned to football, signing with lower league club Boa Esporte. The move sparked outrage. Sponsors pulled out. Fans protested. The club faced global backlash for giving a convicted killer, one who had shown little remorse, another shot at a football career. Eventually, Bruno was ordered back to prison to complete his sentence. Over the years, he has continued to give interviews, often shifting blame and downplaying the horror of his actions. His lack of accountability has only deepened the public's disgust. In football history, few stories are as unsettling as Bruno's. This wasn't a moment of recklessness. It wasn't an accident. It was premeditated, brutal, and permanent. A man who once stood in goal for Brazil's most iconic club used his fame and influence to try to escape justice, and nearly succeeded. Marcos Alonso has enjoyed a long and successful footballing career, winning major trophies with Chelsea and earning caps for Spain. Known for his attacking flair as a left-back, he's scored in FA Cup finals, played in Champions League semi-finals and been a key part of some of the most successful Chelsea sides in recent years. But long before all that, before the spotlight of Stamford Bridge, Alonso was involved in an incident that left one young woman dead, and serious questions about accountability in football unanswered. In the early hours of May 3, 2011, while playing for Bolton Wanderers, Alonso was driving a car through Madrid with 4 passengers, including a 22-year-old woman named Vanya G. According to police reports, Alonso lost control of the vehicle while speeding, traveling at nearly 112 km per hour, about 70 miles per hour, in a 50 km per hour zone. The car crashed into a wall with immense force, and Vanya, who was sitting in the back seat without a seatbelt, was critically injured. She died a few hours later in hospital. Subsequent toxicology tests showed that Alonso was driving under the influence of alcohol at the time of the crash, nearly twice the legal limit in Spain. He was arrested and charged with homicide by imprudent driving, a charge that could have carried a prison sentence of up to 4 years. But that sentence never came. Instead, Alonso's case was quietly resolved in Spanish courts years later. In 2016, 5 years after the crash, he accepted a plea deal. He was ordered to pay a fine of €61,000 and received a driving ban of 3 years and 4 months. In exchange, no prison time was served. Vanya's family accepted financial compensation, and Alonso's legal troubles ended. By then, Alonso's career had taken off. After leaving Bolton, He had spells with Fiorentina and Sunderland before signing with Chelsea in 2016. At Stamford Bridge, he flourished under managers like Antonio Conte and Thomas Tuchel, winning the Premier League, FA Cup, Europa League, and Champions League. His deadly left foot and attacking instinct made him one of the most talked-about fullbacks in Europe. But the 2011 incident has never fully left the public consciousness. For many fans, especially outside Chelsea circles, Alonso's success is hard to separate from the death he caused. While his talent is undeniable, the fact that a young woman died, and that no jail time was served, raises uncomfortable questions. Would the outcome have been the same if he weren't a professional footballer? Did fame and money protect him from consequences that others would have faced? Alonso rarely speaks about the crash publicly. There are no interviews, no visible signs of remorse beyond the legal settlement. For him, it's a chapter closed. But for those aware of what happened that night in Madrid, it remains an indelible part of his story. A tragic reminder that one reckless decision behind the wheel can end a life and haunt another forever. In the mid-2000s, Luke McCormick was one of the rising stars of English football. As the starting goalkeeper for Plymouth Argyle, he was making waves in the Championship and even earning recognition as a future Premier League talent. At just 24, McCormick had already played over 100 games for the club and was being scouted by teams higher up the football pyramid. But all of that ended in one devastating night. A night that left 2 children dead, and McCormick's career permanently scarred. On June 7, 2008, McCormick attended a wedding celebration with friends and former teammates. He drank heavily throughout the evening. The next morning, still over the legal alcohol limit, he chose to drive home, despite warnings from others. While speeding on the M6 in Staffordshire, his black Range Rover veered into the path of a Toyota Previa minivan carrying a family of 6 returning from a day at Silverstone. The crash was horrific. 8-year-old Aaron and 10-year-old Ben Peake were killed instantly. Their father, Phil, who had been driving the van, was left with multiple injuries. Witnesses described McCormick's car as swerving and erratic before impact. When police arrived on the scene, McCormick was slurring his words and smelled of alcohol. A breath test later confirmed he was nearly twice the legal limit. Investigators also determined he had been driving at around 90 miles per hour at the time of the collision. The public reaction was swift and brutal. It was an entirely preventable tragedy. McCormick was arrested, charged with causing death by dangerous driving and driving under the influence, and held in custody. In October 2008, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 7 years and 4 months in prison, along with a 4-year driving ban. The judge described his actions as a grossly irresponsible act, and said the deaths were as needless as they were tragic. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. But in 2012, just over 3 years into his sentence, McCormick was released on parole. In a move that sparked public outrage, Plymouth Argyle re-signed him, giving him a chance to resume his football career. Fans and sponsors were divided. Some believed he deserved a second chance. Others felt he should never again wear the shirt of a professional club. To his credit, McCormick kept a low profile upon his return. He never attempted to justify his actions or seek public sympathy. He quietly rebuilt his career and even served as club captain before retiring in 2021. But for many, no number of clean sheets or quiet seasons could erase what had happened. Luke McCormick's story is a chilling reminder that one night, one decision, can destroy lives, not just of those in the wrong, but of innocent families. He wasn't a villain in the traditional sense, but his recklessness made him the cause of irreversible tragedy. And while he returned to football, the shadow of that crash never left him. Martin Barbarič is a name most football fans won't recognize. He never played in the Champions League, never represented his country on the world stage, and never made headlines for his performances on the pitch. But in 2013, his name exploded across Czech and Slovak media, not because of what he did on the field, but because of what he did off it. Barbarič's story is among the most tragic and disturbing in modern football history. A tale of domestic violence, mental instability, and ultimately, murder. Barbarič was a striker who spent most of his career playing in the lower tiers of Czech and Slovak football. He was talented enough to play for clubs like Spartak Trnava, but never quite broke through to top-tier football. Still, he was a professional, and by many accounts, a respected one. Quiet. Focused. The kind of player who kept his head down. But what no one saw was the growing turmoil in his personal life. In April 2013, Czech police responded to a shocking scene in the city of Přerov. The bodies of Martin Barbarič and his former partner, 29-year-old Romana, were found in a flat. According to police reports, Barbarič had murdered her, stabbing her multiple times during a heated argument, and then turned the knife on himself, dying at the scene. The killing sent shockwaves through Czech football. Romana had reportedly tried to end the relationship multiple times. Friends described it as toxic, with Barbarič allegedly struggling with possessiveness and emotional instability. Yet few had seen signs of impending violence, at least not to this degree. Media coverage at the time tried to piece together the motive. Some cited mental health struggles. Others pointed to a pattern of controlling behavior. But the truth is, we'll never know exactly what pushed Barbarič to commit such a horrifying act. What we do know is that a woman's life was stolen, and a footballer's career and legacy ended in blood. Unlike other cases in this video involving negligence or reckless decisions, Barbarič's crime was deeply personal and deliberate. There were no excuses to hide behind. No legal technicalities. No public redemption arc. His death ensured that. The story barely made international headlines, perhaps because Barbarič wasn't a global name. But that doesn't make it any less haunting. It serves as a brutal reminder that domestic violence can erupt in any community, even in professional sports, where athletes are often shielded by fame or overlooked due to their status. Martin Barbarič was part of a system that rarely intervenes in players' private lives until it's too late. His final act was not a goal, not a match-winning header, but a senseless act of violence that destroyed 2 lives and left a permanent stain on Czech football history. Gavin Grant was never a global star, but he was a promising English footballer with a professional career that touched several league clubs, including Gillingham, Millwall, and Wycombe Wanderers. A quick, tricky winger with potential, Grant made appearances in the Football League and carved out a respectable career in the 2000s. But what fans didn't see was the double life he was living off the pitch, one that would lead to a shocking murder conviction and a life sentence behind bars. Grant grew up in the Stonebridge area of northwest London, a neighborhood often associated with gang activity, poverty, and violence. He had a turbulent youth, but football seemed to offer him a way out. That all changed in 2004 when a 21-year-old man named Leon Labastide was shot and killed outside his home in Harlesden, an act police described as a targeted execution-style killing. Though multiple suspects were questioned, no charges were immediately brought. 3 years later, in 2007, Grant was first arrested and charged with murder in relation to the Labastide case. At the time, he was still actively playing football and even scored for Wycombe Wanderers while awaiting trial. His first case collapsed due to insufficient evidence, and he was acquitted. For a moment, it looked like Grant had gotten away with it. But the story wasn't over. In 2010, new evidence emerged linking Grant more directly to the killing, including witness testimony and ties to a local gang known as the Harlesden Mandem. He was rearrested, retried, and this time, convicted. Prosecutors described the killing as part of a long-standing gang feud, and Grant was alleged to be part of a retaliatory attack against Labastide, who had connections to a rival crew. The court found that Grant played a role in orchestrating or participating in the murder, not in the heat of the moment, but as part of a deliberate act of violence. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 25 years. At the time of his conviction, Grant was just 26 years old. The football world reacted with shock. While Grant had never been a household name, he was proof that even professionals with contracts, goals, and fans could be living a very different life off the pitch. His case also raised tough questions. How does football, particularly in England, deal with players who come from crime-affected environments? And how do clubs screen for off-field risk? Unlike some players here, Grant's case didn't involve fame shielding him from consequences. His story flew largely under the radar, until the guilty verdict dropped. There was no second act, no post-prison redemption arc, no opportunity to return to the game. Just a life sentence, and a reminder that not every footballer escapes their past. In the mid-1990s, Patrick Kluivert was the future of Dutch football. At just 18, he scored the winning goal in the 1995 Champions League final for Ajax, the youngest player to ever do so at the time. His blend of power, intelligence, and technical ability made him one of the most sought-after strikers in the world. He would go on to play for AC Milan, Barcelona, and the Netherlands national team, scoring over 40 international goals. But behind that glittering resume is a tragedy that has long haunted his career, a moment of recklessness that ended a man's life. On September 9, 1995, just months after his Champions League heroics, Kluivert was driving his friend's BMW M3 in Amsterdam. He had no insurance, no license at the time, and, crucially, he was speeding. According to reports, Kluivert was traveling at nearly 160 km per hour, that's 100 miles per hour, in a 50 km per hour zone, when he lost control of the car and collided with another vehicle. The driver of the other car, Martinus Vainen, a 56-year-old physical therapist and father, was killed. He was simply driving to an appointment when his car was struck by the speeding BMW. The crash was so violent that the victim died at the scene. Kluivert himself suffered only minor injuries. The case became a national scandal in the Netherlands. How could one of the country's brightest young talents, a hero just months earlier, be responsible for something so careless and deadly? Public sentiment was mixed. Some called for harsh punishment. Others viewed it as a tragic mistake by a young man who had made a single terrible decision. In court, Kluivert was charged with death by dangerous driving, but the legal outcome was relatively light. He received 240 hours of community service and had his driving privileges revoked for 18 months. No prison sentence was handed down. For many, especially the family of the victim, the punishment didn't feel proportionate to the damage done. Despite the tragedy, Kluivert's football career continued and flourished. He transferred to AC Milan the following year, then moved to Barcelona where he became one of La Liga's top scorers. With the Netherlands, he starred in multiple major tournaments, including Euro 2000, where he was top scorer with 5 goals. But while the public gradually moved on, the memory of that crash lingered in the background of his legacy. To his credit, Kluivert never shied away from the incident in later years. In interviews, he's referred to it as the darkest moment of his life, saying he lives with the guilt and thinks about the victim often. But the broader public perception has remained complicated. A player whose life was defined by brilliance and burden in equal measure. Patrick Kluivert will always be remembered as one of the most gifted strikers of his generation. But for many, that gift was forever overshadowed by a tragic, avoidable loss. A death that turned a teenage star into a symbol of how quickly everything can change. Lee Hughes was at one point one of the most prolific English strikers outside the Premier League. Known for his movement, instinctive finishing and consistency, Hughes scored over 80 goals for West Bromwich Albion during his first spell with the club, and later became Coventry City's record signing. He had all the tools to succeed at the top level. But in 2003, one reckless night not only ended a man's life, it ended the career Hughes could have had. On November 23, 2003, Hughes had just returned from a West Brom match the day before and spent the night partying with friends. The next morning, while driving his £100,000 Mercedes CL55 AMG on country roads near his home in the West Midlands, Hughes lost control of the vehicle and collided head-on with a Renault driven by Douglas Graham, a 56-year-old father of 4. Graham died from his injuries, and his wife, Maureen, was left with severe injuries that required multiple surgeries. But what made the incident even more appalling was what happened after the crash. Instead of staying at the scene to help the victims or speak to police, Hughes fled. He left the scene of a fatal crash and went into hiding for 36 hours before turning himself in. When he was eventually arrested, toxicology tests could no longer determine whether he had been under the influence of alcohol or drugs at the time of the crash, a delay that potentially shielded him from even harsher consequences. In August 2004, after months of legal proceedings and public scrutiny, Hughes was found guilty of causing death by dangerous driving, leaving the scene of an accident and failing to report the accident. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and received a 10-year driving ban. For a footballer still in his athletic prime, it should have marked the end. But prison wasn't the end for Lee Hughes, at least not in footballing terms. He was released in August 2007 after serving half his sentence, and, remarkably, was signed by Oldham Athletic shortly thereafter. The club's decision caused an immediate backlash. Sponsors pulled out. Fans protested. But Hughes scored goals, and in football, that often overshadows everything else. He continued to play well into his late 30s, scoring goals for Notts County, Port Vale, and Forest Green Rovers, among others. But wherever he went, his past followed him. For many fans, Hughes's name still brings to mind not his goals, but the death he caused, and his choice to run from it. Unlike others who found trouble off the pitch, his crime involved not just recklessness, but cowardice. His decision to flee a man dying in a crumpled car, and then try to resume life as usual, makes his case one of the most unsettling in English football history.